Help support the show by joining the Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. Also, hit that like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content. You know, I had hoped that this week would be much more interesting because, you know, the last two times we played, the last three times I think we played the Kansas City Chiefs, like these games were kind of interesting with the playoff game and then the game right after the divisional game, which was a pretty fun one down in Arrowhead. And I was like, okay, this could be fun, you know, playing meaningful games against the Kansas City Chiefs. Well, unfortunately, not where we're at today. You know, the Browns and Chiefs are at two very different places, right? But in some ways, the Chiefs have gone through things that the Browns are going to hope that they go through, right? Or at least some roadmaps that they hope they had to go through. And I think there's a lot to have there. But first, let's start talking about this game. The number one thing I hear about the Kansas City Chiefs this year is that they play with their food. Do you think this is a result of like, okay, they're just kind of finding ways to win at the end, but they're not playing the cleanest games down the stretch? Or is this something more serious with Kansas City on why like a team like the Panthers can like pop up, have a really good game, almost take them to the edge?
So really it's multifaceted, right? It is a little bit of, hey, we got to figure out a way to win at the end because we're not executing as well as we have early in the game. So they do have that. There's really three things going on that is affecting the whole outcome. And it is a little bit of fatigue. They've been through back-to-back 20-game seasons, right? Even the Super Bowl runs that didn't end in a win, they still played a lot of games. And so this like institutional fatigue is what I keep calling it, right? Is like, yes, there's a lot of young players, but the stars and the coaching staff, they're all exhausted at this point. And I think you can see that, especially if you watch like post-game locker room footage. Everybody's wore out that's been on this team for more than 2 seasons. And it does catch up for you. So I think that's part of it. And they're just trying to buy their time, trying to keep things from getting too crazy and just kind of get the W. And that goes back to playing with their food too, because I do think that they're not trying to act as though they're above everybody, but they are trying to do the minimal they have to do to get a W every week. So they don't give away what they want to do in January. And that's what it all comes down to. And it's like this thing with Hollywood getting hurt, right? They had a whole core. I mean, a good, from what I understand, third of the playbook designed around where he was going to be running routes every damn play. And that goes out the window. And so it is partially some retooling, you know, the additions they had to go out and get veterans to try to make up for some of that. But it is a lot of, we're going to try to keep it pretty simple. We'll give you window dressing. We'll give you weird formations if we want to. But like the core things that we think we can attack, the teams we expect to play in January, we're not giving that stuff away. So we're doing the bare minimum to get these dubs and move through the regular season, because we think if we screw up and we drop one, they feel that they can manage that, try to keep their first place seed and not dig themselves a hole. But in January, they want all the goods on the table. And the last thing is really what we saw against the Chargers. And that's the fact that there's a lot of young players on this team that grew up watching the early Mahomes, right? And the early days with Kelsey. And they get on this roster, and this is still a very young roster outside of the stars, right? They just get that like feeling like we're going to play our best, but you know, if we come up a little short, we still got Mahomes. The dude's magic. He's going to pull it off. And
yeah, I can try to make this play, right? Like, you know,
it's just, and it's self-fulfilling prophecy then. So they get themselves in a position or a series of positions where like, he's got to do something. And like last week when they're like down and he says, you know, just relax. It's going to be all right. I'm going to make something happen. And he goes out and does it. Now that just feeds them more that they're like, hey, you know, he's going to bail us out every time. So I think it's a couple of those things, and it's all feeding into this. They're not playing their best games because they've designed not to this point, but teams sneak up on them. The Panthers did, certainly. The AFC West stuff didn't surprise me, but the Panthers did a little bit. And I wouldn't be surprised if this game is closer than we think it's going to be.
It's going to be interesting to see. And you bring up like such a fascinating point about like how different Andy Reid's job is, right, from a lot of other coaches, because he has to consider that, right? Like, I can't just call the best plays that I feel like are best for that situation, because it's like it might be something that I don't want Buffalo to know about yet, right? Like, I don't want to give them a peek on this. And I always joke that like sometimes coaches are a bit overprotective. They kind of go Fort Knox and in kind of crazy mode over things. But like when you're working on those margins, right? Like if you're a regular team trying to get to the divisional round, yeah, nobody cares what your formations are, right? Like nobody's watching that hard. When you are the Kansas City Chiefs and you are the number one team in the NFL by the fact that you are the reigning dynasty in the league, I think it does start to matter, right? And that's where you see, the allegations of Bill Belichick doing all the Spygate and stuff, where it's like that kind of pressure that is very difficult to kind of keep up with and also maintain a game plan where you're kind of handcuffed by your own success there, which is interesting too, because like you also got to look at it like, hey, Kelsey's not super young, right? Like you gotta manage him. Like you can't use him a ton every week, right? You got to make sure you're monitoring Pat's pitch count because you don't want him to be thrown out before you get to the conference championship game, right? You're game planning to play a longer season. You mentioned this week to be a game where the Browns could potentially come up and surprise Kansas City. I look at it two ways. One, yeah, it does make sense. On the other end, you got Travis Kelce in here. He never stops to mention how much he loves the city of Cleveland, right? This game's in Cleveland. So I imagine he's going to be up for this one. If there's like room for him to get like a couple extra plays this week, he might get them. And then Kareem Hunt returning to Cleveland. And look, Travis don't got beef with Cleveland or the Browns organization. Kareem does. Like, that is a different. Kareem has had beef with both organizations, and he's pinballed back in between both of them, right? But every time he's played one of them, it's been an antagonistic energy in that game, and I imagine he's going to bring that. And when he does, he runs really well. The Browns haven't stopped the run too well this year either. I just see it. I just think it's tough to see a world where like the Browns and Jameis Winston are like focused enough this week and don't make those small mistakes. Don't let Pat Mahomes get the ball at the end of the game. Don't do something like Dallas did, where it's like, oh, you got him off the field, and then you do something stupid like get a penalty or touch a punt. I wonder how close it's going to be, and also what is the impact of Myles Garrett going to be in this game. I think a lot of people are looking at this like, hey, the left tackle situation for the Chiefs has been a bit unsure. And if you're Andy Reid, if you're trying to test somebody, see if they can hold up through the playoffs, I mean, this is the week where you're like, hey, we got to get this dude to test because they're not going to be much better than Myles for the rest of the year.
It's kind of a gauntlet right now. I will say that, because you got Myles now. It's 3 games in 10 days for the Chiefs right now. You're going to see him on Christmas Day, right? So you get him, you get Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter next week, and then they get TJ. So yeah, it's all hands on deck. And if you got an answer for the left tackle spot, please let me know, because I'm still trying to figure it out.
Hey man, I was all over Roger Rosengarten in the draft process this year. I was so mad he went to Baltimore, and I watch him every week. I'm like, he looks good, man, just like he did in the Senior Bowl. But that was my answer for everybody at left tackle. Go get that Rosengarten kid, man. He's gonna fall to the second round. He's good, and he's looked pretty good so far in Baltimore. But yeah, I mean, left tackle's just such a hard position to fill, and it's not that it's like hard to find guys who can play left tackle. It's hard to find guys quickly who can play left tackle for you, right? Because it's not one of those positions you could just like grab a guy and plug in and think everything's going to be fine. Even if the guy's good, it might take a couple years for him to like fit and understand, especially when you got a quarterback like Mahomes who does a lot of different stuff behind the line of scrimmage. It's like, you're going to probably have to get used to that, right? Versus like the thing with Jameis is a lot easier to be his left tackle versus Deshaun, because Jameis, he's staying in a straight line. North-south, a little bit east-west, but if he's going east-west, he's definitely going north after his second step, right? Game planning for Jameis Winston, I think, I want to have this conversation with the defensive coordinator one day, because he has to be a fascinating person to game plan against, right? Because he is talented enough that you can't bait him a ton and expect it not to cost you something, because he will drop a couple in the bucket pretty reliably almost every game. The issue with Jameis is like, it's kind of like watching a toddler run around And like I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, but like you know how you watch a kid run around and they just come out with way too much energy to start, right? And you know they're gonna be out by 2 hours, right? And that's the thing with Jameis is like he comes out with so much energy. He wants to throw, he throws these haymakers every throw, right? This middle of the field haymaker, haymaker, and he tires himself out by the fourth quarter. So when you call a field out, it becomes a disaster, right? Because he's tired. But he has like stamina to where he could make that throw sometimes, but it's not going to be every time. If you're Kansas City, do you just kind of just sit back and try to do what teams did to Pat for a while? It's like just go cover two, try to get Jameis to be bored to death and hope he tries to test your zone? Or are you going to be a bit more aggressive with him to try to force him into a mistake?
I think it's both hands. You're going to jab with the zones, right? But you're going to try to catch him with that hook every now and then. And I think the key for him is that Spags, he'll pull out the crazy blitzes and all that. But the other thing that he'll do is he will go to disguise plus pressure if he feels he can get home. I know Batonio hasn't been practicing, right? And so Jones might have a little advantage there. If you can speed James up and disguise what you're doing in the shell, I think that is kind of the formula that they want to do, but they don't want to have to push for it. So I do think you're going to get a lot of two-man off the go and see what they can come up with. It looks like they're going to have Joshua Williams available as that second corner. So the question for me really becomes is, do they choose to just shadow Judy with McDuffie and try to take him away? Or are they going to try to play the team game? They have been burned a couple times just trying to play team. So I do think some special attention might be on the way because they watched that Broncos film too.
Yeah. Speaking of the Broncos film, somebody that you've seen in the AFC West a ton, Jerry Judy, been in Cleveland, playing really well. When you watch him from the outside looking in, given that you've seen him in Cleveland a little bit, you've seen him in Denver a lot, what looks different to you for him from the perspective of somebody who's just looked at him as somebody you had the game plan against?
For me, it looks a little bit more opportunistic, and it does come from playing off of somebody like Cooper in particular. It does come from playing in a system where you have to get him the ball. Whereas in Denver, they never really made that job number one. They wanted it to be part of a core. So you move the ball around, spread around as many guys as you can. And it was never force feed him. I think if you do that, you're going to get a positive response most of the time. Now, I won't say it's all the time because he does have mental lapses. He certainly did in Denver. I think he's maybe been more consistent in Cleveland. I don't know how you feel, but that's what I see from what I've been able to watch. But I think at the end of the day, he's also a guy that has that next gear. And if he's motivated, he can go hit that. And I do think what you saw against Denver was motivation, bringing his floor up to where his ceiling might be. I don't know if he's got that in him every week.
Yeah, it's what has been different with him is he's been doing all the little stuff in Cleveland. Even during the Deshaun games where nobody was doing well. I heard he was awful on scramble drills in Denver. He was pretty good at that, right? It seems like he learned some lessons in Denver on what he actually wasn't doing and all the criticism he got. It's one of those things where the people telling you it told you it in a way that probably didn't make you want to please them, and it made it so that he probably wasn't going to act on any of these changes until he left Denver, right? Because all the stuff that Steve Smith and Mark Schlereth were criticizing about, he doesn't block, he's not really engaged once the ball breaks his way. If he's not going to get the ball, he's not really running full, doing everything he needs to do there. He's doing all of that stuff here in Cleveland much better. I saw him eat up Nick Benito in that Denver game, right? And I'm I never saw that when I watched his Denver tape. So, I think he learned a few hard lessons there. And I don't know if Kevin was just a better messenger to get that stuff to him. But you know how it is. You change jobs. Sometimes it's easier to realize your mistakes once you get away from the old job, right? Because fixing those mistakes came with extra shit that he probably didn't want to deal with. But yeah, it's been interesting to watch Jerry Judy. The Browns are in an interesting place with quarterback, right? I would say since about 2018, they've known who their starter was for better or worse, right? It was Baker Mayfield for a while. Then they switched up, went after Deshaun. And you had other guys play, but the starter was always assumed to be Deshaun. If he's healthy, he's going to play, or active if he's going to play. Same thing with Baker Mayfield. The Browns are not going back to that this offseason, right? They're going to have to go back into the kind of Wild West of quarterback. situations. There was that brief moment of time before the Chiefs traded for Alex Smith,
Alex.
right? Like, and kind of stabilized it. Just kind of speak to how important was Alex Smith in the role that he played to getting you to Pat Mahomes, and where the Chiefs are now.
He was, and Pat will tell you this himself, he was critical to getting the thing built. You called it a nest before. That's a really nice way to put it, because he went through some of the early days where the interior offensive line wasn't that great, and he had to move around more than he wanted to. At that time, the tackles were better than the interior was. Now we've kind of flipped at this point. But he also was captain of a team that had no wide receiver touchdowns in a season. And that tells you something there, right?
Yeah.
So like he was doing the hardcore, like you can call it a rebuild, what all you want. Like he was pouring the cement on the new foundation. That's what he was doing. And he got to reap some of the benefits. But as soon as Mahomes got there, I mean, I'm talking like before September was over, they knew it was, hey, he's already learned enough that he can get on the field. I think one of the biggest jobs Andy did that year was hold Pat out until the last week of the season, when you rested Alex and you let Mahomes play, because the cat was out of the bag long before that. And you got to give credit to Alex to building that around and getting guys to play as a team, especially on the offensive side, play as a unit. And he set that and he demanded that. And he had the presence and the command enough as a quarterback that had been successful elsewhere to demand that kind of play. And that set the floor for Patrick to then be, okay, now you can play as a team. Now raise your level, everybody. And that's what I think he is best at doing.
Yeah, I think too, like the special guy is like always easy to kind of identify and say, oh, I want to get to the special guy. I think that's what a lot of people do when they evaluate quarterbacks is, okay, let's get to the special guy. I want the Andrew Luck, right? How do you evaluate somebody? Because like we use this term mid, right? And I think mid has become synonymous with bad, but that's not what mid is supposed to be, right? Like mid is supposed to be like, hey, it works. Like, hey, Alex Smith, it works. Were you getting past the divisional round with it consistently? Maybe not, but you were able to maintain your organization, maintain Andy Reid, and build on top of the foundation that you were pouring there, right? Because you're not going to fix it all in one offseason. You're going to still go into if you're trying to fix your offensive line, maybe one year you focus on guard and center and you figure out maybe guard or center in the draft, and maybe you get a free agent to plug in, and you still got to go through that long-term process to be able to fix the problem completely. But it doesn't mean that you have to be a terrible team while you do it, because if you are a terrible team while you do it, it means nothing. You're going to fire everybody after a couple of years of being terrible. How do you, when you're looking in a draft, when you're looking at free agency and you're looking for traits of guys who may not be your next franchise guy, right? How do you readjust your lens for that to be able to not be so tainted by, okay, well, this guy, he's not franchise, right? And just kind of immediately write him off. Okay, this guy's not a first round pick. Let's just write him off and then not even think about him for the rest. Like, what do you look for when it comes to that kind of a quarterback that can fill that void without also lowering the bar so much that you end up just being like, oh, well, this guy who can't, like Quinn Ewers or something like that, like he can't throw a field out in college. Let's go ahead and, because he's mid in college, think he's just going to be mid in the NFL.
That's the hardest part, is really that projection. And for me, I always go back to what's been his path in college. Did he come in as a 5-star high school kid and he's played down to mid in college? Like, because there's no room to go up from there, right? Has he made the adjustment? Has he improved? Has he learned new skills? Because then after you know that and you see a guy on film that can then make adjustments and can make progress, then it's, does he have the tools to progress in this system? Does he have the tools to progress guys that I know need someone to push their development? You know, for a lot of teams in this situation, you're not just replacing the quarterback, right? You're giving him new weapons. You're trying to get him to understand protections. Maybe you have new protectors as well. So everybody's got to come together, and he's got to be not just a leader, but a guy can help that development for everyone else. And if you can find that combination, then you go up at the blue chip at the top of the list. If not, you're trying to battle, does he do enough for the team? Can I just let him be the quarterback? Especially with the guys that are, that want to use their legs all the time, right? Do you have the linemen to help that? Do you have the run game to give it a counterbalance when they do man him up and spy him up and he can't do what he wants to do, right? How does he react when he's shut down? I think, much like we were talking about before, the mental side of it is how he reacts is just as big as anything else. And it's the one part of the draft process we don't get any insight into, right? Like I should bug the walls in Indianapolis is what I should do.
Yeah. Yeah. I always think that's the most important part of it is like, also like, do you feel like this guy fits or does he have like something that you can work with? Like you think of somebody like Jameis we had this conversation with Pat Mahomes, right? Where, Andy Reid, he coached Brett Favre. He's dealt with gunslingers in the past. So there are certain things that if Pat Mahomes would have done them with like a more controlling coach like a Kyle Shanahan, right? Maybe Kyle doesn't let him do that, right? Maybe Kyle's like, no, you cannot do this. Like, you need to get that out of your system. Where Andy looks at it and goes, no, let him cook. Like, let him cook. Let's see how far he can take it. Because he was throwing, back when he was like 2019, he was throwing across his body 40 yards downfield. And yeah, and some coaches see that and get a heart attack. Andy Dalton's like, well, let's see where that ball's going to go. Like, maybe he's on to something here, right? And I think that part's also important. Like, how comfortable are you with that player's skill set? You mentioned a quarterback who can run. I think that's a big part of it, right? Some coaches aren't comfortable with it, right? They'll see you run, and the first time that you miss a backside dig because you ran and you got 9 yards, you could have got 15. They're right on your ass, and now you can't focus on what you want to do because you're thinking too much now when it's time to break the pocket, right? That stuff like matters a lot. Like, apparently I didn't think the Bo Nix pick was good. Like, yeah. I was like, what are they thinking? But Sean Payton went in there and was like, nah, I think I could work with that. Like, that dude does what he's told. He's well coached. He's a coach's kid. Nah, that's the kind of person I can work with and get something out of. And I think that part is important too. Kyle Shanahan, I'm watching him, even though Brock Purdy just threw one of the nastiest interceptions I've seen all year. As we're talking. It's a nasty red zone pick. But Kyle Shanahan's another one where it's like, I wish I knew what the conversation was that got him to draft. I can't believe I forgot his name. Second pick in the draft that year. He traded 3 first-round picks for him. Trey Lance out of North Dakota State. Like, what happened in that process where, like, it became obvious after a year he wasn't comfortable with Trey Lance, right? Same thing. You can ask the question with, like, what happened with Stefanski and Deshaun Watson. Like, you made that big decision, and then, like, every year he's out there, it feels like this, like there's that part's not figured out, right? It felt like an arranged marriage, right? Like, it didn't feel natural. And that's the thing. That stuff matters, right? And I wonder how much teams actually like understand that part of it when they're making these decisions, because it's so easy to get caught up in, okay, what does this guy do? What does the tape say he can do? What's his RAS score? What's his radar on his throws, right? And kind of get caught up in all the information that you have. But, football is as much as a science as it is an art. And part of an art is, hey, you love that dude. Why do you love that dude, right? And it's because, there's something about him. Like, when I watch Milroe, I'm like, I think there's something in that kid. Like, his tape's not great at all, but he's been in like so many different offenses. Like, his coaches seem to love him. He's been in 3 offenses so far in his career. And there's something in me. I'm like, maybe the right coach can get something out of him, but you got to be the right guy to be able to figure out what it is that you could do with him. And I think if you're the Browns, understanding that part not being well thought out with Deshaun Watson, you got to learn from that and look at, like, if you're going to go after Sam Darnold, really have an understanding of, like, who Sam Darnold is, what are his flaws, and, like, are you okay with what his skill set could possibly bring? Like Andy Reid, he might be somebody who could work with Jameis as a backup, where he's like, I don't mind that Jameis wants to make that throw. I kind of like that Jameis wants to make that throw, right? Like, it could get crazy because that one year he was with Bruce Arians, who absolutely encouraged it. He threw 30 interceptions. Yeah. I think the problem with Jameis is that, he sees the field like Pat. He just ain't got Pat's arm, right? But it's the most fascinating part about football is, like, all this science, and at the end, it could really come down to vibes.
Yeah, it's dudes in rooms. I mean, it's funny because the Broncos did it, and everybody made fun of Peyton for saying, it's my love language. But that's the truth. He wants a guy that will do what he's told, will take his marching orders and go execute until the point that he hits his breaking point, and he'll fire back. He wants somebody with a spine, but he wants somebody that will carry out orders. And I think when you got to that point, I truly feel, because I was a Knicks guy, I could see that in the right circumstance, he could evolve. Peyton's it. Is it because he's this creator? No. It's because he's doing what Sean is outlining for him to do. And then when he gets in a point where he's got something he's got to say, he ain't afraid to say it. There's not a lot of coaches like that in this league. There's a lot of guys that it's got to be back and forth. And the quarterback's got to be much more aggressive with what he wants or definitive with what he wants. That's hard to find too. So it really is marriage. It's a great analogy for it.
Yeah, because it's a relationship at the end of the day. And a relationship, you hope, like, even if it's a bridge guy, it's going to be a 4 or 5 year relationship, right? Like, then if you're talking about, your franchise guy, I mean, that's 10, 15 years. There's a reason why John Harbaugh is on Hard Knocks talking about, I love seeing Lamar wake up, eat Cheerios. I mean, that's something you would say to your wife, right? Like it ain't that different where he's like, nah, like, and think about the Lamar thing, right? Like, again, a lot of teams would have screwed that up. A lot of teams would have screwed that up because Lamar comes in there and he's so Florida, right? And some coaches ain't going to like how Florida he is, right? And the fact that he doesn't have, like, he doesn't wear a traditional quarterback face mask. He has, like, the lines in it like a wide receiver. Like, all this stuff would have thrown off a lot of coaches, but it just had no effect on John. He's like, nah, man, like, he can run, let's run him. Like,
and
he
John
can throw, let's throw him.
Yeah. That's the interesting part, right? Is some of the guys that are a little bit farther out there, there's a couple of trees that it actually works for in this league. And identifying those is definitely part of the puzzle.
Yeah, it's like there's one thing about understanding that guy's skill set. Are you comfortable with his skill set? Are you truly at peace with what that brings? Russell Wilson, another example. Like, for whatever reason, there was no peace there with the skill set in Russ in Denver. You go to Pittsburgh, it's the same shit. But they're just like, nah, we got George Pickens, and you know what? We going to get Mike Williams and Van Jefferson, and you just going to throw on the outside all day. Screw the middle of the field. Like, we throw one to Pratt Fryermuth to keep him honest, Sure. But if we go in the middle field, it's Jaylen Warren on a delayed release running. Like, that's how we're going to run the game. And it's like, we talk about it as if like, oh, these guys have like overalls coming out of college and you got to pick the guy with the highest overall, but it's matchmaking, right? Like it's about figuring out, is this guy a match? Like, do you think that this could blossom? Like, and do you think that does this guy have a skill set that you were comfortable growing with and comfortable living with the downsides of it? Maybe he's not a downfield passer. Does that bug you? If that bugs you, don't need to draft that guy.
For you,
right? Yeah. He's not the most accurate thrower of the football right now. If that bugs you, you don't need to draft Anthony Richardson, right? Like, hey, he's not a big dude. If that bugs you, you don't need to draft Bryce Young, right? Like, but so many times people just look at it like, oh no, but this guy has a composite score and all this stuff, and it's like, no, you got to draft the guy that you're comfortable with. If you're not comfortable with this dude, it ain't gonna work, right? Nope. It's gonna be another talented guy that might show up somewhere else. I mean, the Browns ultimately had this with Baker Mayfield, where like Baker has that moxie, Baker has that confidence, that bravado about himself. That was not something that they loved about him, and it didn't work. They didn't draft Baker, so like it was kind of an arranged situation there, but it didn't work. And then you tried to go out and get somebody else, and it didn't work with that guy, right? And both those guys are talented. Both those guys have had good seasons elsewhere. And Kevin Stefanski's a really good coach, 2-time coach of the year. But still, all that can't save you from a matchup not being there. And it's like, Andy Reid probably got Alex Smith and was like, no, yeah, me and him, we work together, right? Like that works out. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with the fact that like he's not going to be the most aggressive guy downfield, right? Like I think in Kevin's heart of hearts, if you ask him who he loves, he's like most Shanahan guys, Kirk Cousins, right? Like, like it's so funny too that that's the war going on between like the offensive philosophies in the NFL. It's like either you're an Andy Reid tree or you're one of like the 3 West Coast trees going on in the NFL right now, like the McVay, was it McVay, Shanahan, and then Kubiak? Yeah, yeah, like everybody's coming for like one of those trees or like Andy Reid's tree, and like those two philosophies at quarterback could not be more different because we talked about it. The Andy guys are like, nah, man, do it. Like, yeah, do you? And that is not the vibe that you get from these other coaches. It's like, no, you need to do this. Like,
and both of them can be successful, but the longevity seems to be on the side of the guys that adapt to their players instead of the other way around.
Because if you're gonna have like 3 successful years or 4 successful years with the quarterback, well, he's gonna want to grow. Right. If he is a competitor. And that's the question, I think, with all these West Coast offense guys is, okay, do you have it in you to allow that player to grow after they have mastered what you want them to do? Right. Like, is that trust there? Are you willing to relinquish trust? I think this has been Kyle Shanahan's biggest problem is like, at the end of the day, he's not going to relinquish trust. Right. And I think that Super Bowl broke him. Because he gave that trust to Matt Ryan, and then it blew up in his face. And then when he went to the Super Bowl again, and then Jimmy Garoppolo was throwing interceptions with his eyes closed, he ain't never going to trust another quarterback again, right? That's always going to pop up with him. Like Sean McVay, though, he got Matt Stafford. He was like, okay, let's see what else you can do, right? Like there, you have to, once that player shows himself to be, that franchise quality player, you got to pull off a little bit, let that guy be that guy, because then, there's no system for a franchise quarterback. It's just that guy's offense, right? When you have a franchise guy, it's the Pat Mahomes offense. It's not Andy Reid anymore. But yeah, quarterback, such a fascinating position. I could talk about it for like literally 3 hours here. Are there any, what do you feel about this Sam Darnold thing? Just a quick thought on it. How real do you think that thing is?
I got to tell you, like, I go back and forth because I liked him coming out. And I felt like he went somewhere that he wasn't supported and they weren't going to get him. But now, like, I'm not sure what you see on the field today you can get anywhere else. This might be a magic pairing as well. It might not be Hollywood, but it's a pretty damn good movie because it's working. And I worry that it's then going to inflate him. And I just feel for the kid because he's been through so much and now he's found a way to do that. If he ends up somewhere else where they're not willing to adapt to him a little bit, I don't know that it's going to work.
Yeah. It's like I think he has a very interesting style where like he's a gunslinger by definition, but he's not crazy, right?
Doesn't like chances though. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Like he's calculating. He wants to throw the ball downfield, but he's not Jameis, where Jameis is like, what window? What cover two? Like, and look, sometimes it works because like nobody was throwing it that never cover two, and Jameis is like, well, what happens if you throw at it?
Right. I can break that.
Yeah, he's like, all right, well, like he has that old school. What JP Acosta I talked to him about. He's like, some quarterbacks have that old school mentality where it's like, oh, let's see if that cover two's working, right? Like, let's just throw right into it today and see if they're up and awake, right? I'm not just gonna give it to him because I see a pre-snap. But again, it just goes to like, okay, if he lands somewhere where I think somebody's comfortable with that with him, I think there might be a spot. I think Cleveland's an interesting spot for him. It depends on what the money is, because like the Browns can do it, but you want to be real careful, like because you're just getting out of the Watson thing, right? And you don't want to go into let's go pay $35 million a year for Sam Darnold. It's gonna be, especially when he did not have the good year with you, right? Like, it's gonna be tough thing to ask your fan base, like, hey, this guy who was good somewhere else, we're gonna go with him again after literally doing that with Baker Mayfield and Deshaun. I think it's an interesting one. I just don't know what the market's gonna look like for quarterback this year. So many teams took quarterback last year. I just don't believe that there's gonna be a robust market for Sam Darnold. and like a trade market for Shador Sanders at the top of this draft, to go ahead and take him number 1 overall. Like, it just doesn't seem like there's that many buyers, and there's a lot of teams that might hire a coach, and that first year coach, man, the last thing you trying to do is take a quarterback or like attach yourself to quarterback in year 1. Yeah, that's a bad idea. So it's like, are you gonna? But then if like you're Antonio Pierce, do you draft a rookie quarterback with a guy that you're probably like, if you don't fire him this offseason, you're probably going to fire him the next? Like, is that a good move?
No, that's terrible. So, I mean, honestly, I think that actually works in Sam's favor, to tell you the truth.
Really?
But I don't have any quarterback in my top 15 right now at all, including Shador. So I think this class is depressed enough. I won't say it's the Pickett class, but it's pretty depressed, at least from where I'm sitting right now. So I wonder if that doesn't push the market for Sam and whatever. I don't even know if there's another quarterback that I'd be willing to pay $35 million to, because I'm cheap like most organizations, but it might turn into something where you might have to go there. Are you comfortable with it?
Yeah, I'm not comfortable with 35 for Sam. Like, 18's tough for me. Like, yeah, like on like a 2+1, 18, and like maybe like a third of it's guaranteed. Like, maybe if you could structure the deal where like it's 35, but it's really 20. Like, you got to really convince me that's where the market was, though, right? Like, where it's like, okay, it's 35, but he has to get to the Super Bowl and be first team All-Pro and get 3 MVP votes before he gets $35 million. And it's like, okay, well, you could maybe work with that. It's just such a commitment, though. Like, once you're giving a quarterback that much money, I think the same thing that would stop somebody from drafting a quarterback would probably stop them from making that commitment. Because if you thought you could get Sam Darnold for like a hot 1+, like a 1 year 20 kind of deal there, then I think, teams would be all over that, right? But if he's looking for a long-term deal out of this thing, then I think that's going to slow down the market for him a little bit, because I don't see a lot of these teams being in a position where they're really trying to commit to something super long. Like, the Raiders, the Giants, who else is Tennessee? Maybe those are like the main teams. Cleveland looking for a quarterback, and like some of these teams might think, okay, well, obviously I think Cleveland's the only one that has a strong enough coach to be like, okay, we could just work with something for a year or two, right, and just try to be whatever we can be. But the other 3 teams, I mean, they're probably hiring new coaches. Brian Callahan's the only one's going to stay because it's his first year. And maybe they go out and say, hey, let's go get Brian Callahan the guy. But, like, I don't know if Brian Callahan loves Darnold, right? It comes down to some of that personal stuff. And it's like, I can see it very easy for a lot of teams, since there's not a ton of these teams in the quarterback market, to say to themselves, yeah, let's just punt this, man. Like, let's punt. And then if somebody's there in day 3 of the draft, like, that's why I think this class is a little bit different than 2022 from, like, I think day 3, like the second crop of quarterback is significantly better than like Desmond Ridder, right? Like, I was not a fan of Desmond or Will Levis coming out. But I think that's where it's a little bit stronger there for the back end of this draft. It's tough to make that commitment this year with these guys. And like, if Darnold's going to be interested, because like if he wants that Baker Mayfield deal, you got to get it from the team that you're on. Like, I just don't see a team. I don't see a team giving him that's not like, that didn't have him.
Let me ask you this, because my favorite quarterback from that class, I believe he's in Cleveland now. How you like Bailey Zappi?
Oh, Bailey Zapp? He has not played at all for the Browns. But yeah, I think he's more competition for DTR. Like, I think they see something in him. My issue with DTR is like, the talent is there. And like, I think he's gotten better at like the downfield passing stuff that he really struggled with coming out of UCLA. And like, he's made some progress. And like, you watch that first couple of drives he was out there with Cincinnati, you're like, oh no, there might be something there. I think the issue with him ultimately is like, man, when one thing goes wrong on the football field for him, it's over. Like, it just crashes and he turns into a completely different player. And that is a critical flaw for a quarterback for me, where I'm like, nah. I'd rather have the Jameis where you gonna make that flaw and just be like, nah, I'm still throwing nines. Like,
Yep.
like I'm going back out there and doing my thing. And that puts Kevin at a pretty interesting spot because he probably knows he doesn't want to overreact to Jameis doing that because he also doesn't want to like make DTR think I could never make a mistake. Yeah, right. Like he's like, no, man, I would like bounce back. Like I'm not gonna be too hard on you or whatever. Because like Chip Kelly's like super hard about that kind of stuff, and it might just be, just shaking off the Chip Kelly from him, right? But and like he was like a 4-year player under him, like super coachable kid, like really nice guy, but I think that might be part of like the weird bind they are in with Jameis and probably why they brought Jameis into the first place is to be like, hey, loosen him up a little bit, right? Like let that kid know he can make a mistake or two. It's fine. But now that Jameis is playing, he's making some of these mistakes on the field. You're Kevin, you're like, I can't yell at him. Like I can't yell at him because you're trying to also like put this kid in the best position so you can just see what you have if you give him a good nest to play in, right? But as far as Zap goes, I imagine he's gonna be like who the Browns would like to have. Like it's like their third quarterback or their like practice squad guy for a little while. Cause like what I've seen from him in New England, it's just like, he doesn't play a very exciting game, but you know what? No. he makes sure the train's on time at times. Right?
He was starting to loosen up in Kansas City, though, from what I understand. And I'm excited for the kid because of all those quarterbacks, I still like him the best. So I hope he finds his right fit for a coach and gets a shot at some point.
Yep, definitely, Ryan. Always a joy having you on.
Thanks,
we never just talk about Kansas City when you're on.
Nope.
We always just drift into like 14 different topics. Make sure you check them out. Ryan, where can they see more of you?
Yeah, I'm on Locked On Chiefs every day, audio and video. My home channel is RGR Football here on YouTube. It's my main one. And NFL 33 is the website. It's over on Substack, and I kind of cover things that are non-Chiefs so I can take a breath every now and then.
Awesome. Yeah, I like to do that too, especially when your team's 3-win team. It's like, oh yeah, let's just step out of this. Let's just see what else is out there, right? Like, let's look at the draft, something like that. But definitely, we'll have you back on because this is going to be a big draft for the Browns. Finally got a first-round pick back. Super excited about all of that. But appreciate you for being on. Make sure you go check out Ryan's work. Y'all have a great day. Have a better night. Peace.